Hey, cousin, I'm doing well. How about you?
Good, good, good. So are we ready to rock and roll on this meeting?
Cousin Chair. Yes.
Okay. Well, now that you're here, we're all in our places with bright, shiny faces. We're going to go ahead and call the October 15th meeting of the Interagency Equity Advisory Committee Ad Hoc Subcommittee on Housing, Infrastructure, and Broadband to order. Thank you all for participating. Pursuant to SB 544, we are participating in this meeting via Zoom and teleconference only. At this time, I'd ask Justin to do roll call for us, please.
Okay, happy to. Thank you. Just checking the attendees real quick. Ana Gonzalez. Herb Hastings. Gloria Huerta. Amber Novi. Michelle Rousey. Connie Stewart.
Here.
Randy Torres Van Vleck. Christine Williams.
Here.
Cheryl Villegas Walker.
I'm here.
William Walker.
I'm present.
Outstanding. Thank you all for taking your time today. I want to especially thank and acknowledge staff for all their dedication and hard work behind the scenes in assisting with putting this meeting together and the agenda. At this time, I'd like to ask Sequoia to do the land acknowledgement, agenda item number 2, please.
Yeah, thank you. Our land acknowledgement is as follows. We acknowledge that the land that we now call California is the ancestral lands of the over 109 nations, tribes, and peoples. The indigenous peoples of this area have a deep reciprocal relationship with the land as its original stewards. Their ways, methods, and traditions have contributed to California's rich biodiversity and have impacted the transportation network for the state. We stand with indigenous communities and are committed to partnering and advocating for a more equitable and sustainable future. Our transportation network not only connects us to families, friends, work, and leisure, it connects us to our past and our future. We embrace our past with a future commitment to inclusiveness and equity for everyone who calls the state home. Thank you, Cheryl.
That was outstanding. Thank you, Sequoia. And for those of you that haven't heard yet, I have the great fortune of being in Yosemite Valley for a couple of days and have learned a great deal while I'm here. And currently in sitting in Awaniti tribal land, although there were apparently 7 different tribal nations that occupied Yosemite Valley prior to that time. Is there anyone else? Just raise your hand if you would like to do a land acknowledgement. Otherwise, we will. Okay, Cousin Walker.
Just quickly, an Ohlone, unceded Ohlone territory, San Francisco.
Thank you so much, and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
I'm on
Miss Stewart.
Oh, thank you. I'm on the unceded territory of the Wiyot tribe.
Very good. Anyone else? Very good. Thank you. We're going to move on now to agenda item number 3, which is public comments. Do we have any public comment on non-agenda items? Justin, if you could check both anyone that's participating via video or by phone. Is there anyone?
I'm not seeing any requests to comment at this time.
Very good. So that was public comment on non-agenda items. Justin, thank you for that. We'll move on then to agenda item number 4, which is adoption of the August meeting minutes, which were very well done. I hope everyone's had a chance to read and review the minutes. Are there any modifications, changes, clarifications to the minutes? Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to adopt the minutes as presented.
I make a motion to adopt the minutes as presented.
I'll
Yes,
second.
Am. Very good. We have Amber, and I think that was Kristen. Is that right?
Christine, yep.
Christine. Okay, we'll do a roll call vote on that, please, Justin.
All right, thank you. Ana Gonzalez. Herb Hastings. Gloria Huerta. Amber Novi.
Yes.
Michelle Rousey. Connie Stewart.
Yes.
Randy Torres Van Vleck. Christine Williams.
Yes.
Cheryl Villegas Walker.
Yes.
And then William Walker is a non-voting ex officio member, correct?
Correct.
But he thought the minutes were fantastic. I can tell by the look on his face.
You know,
Oh,
I
well.
was ready to say aye.
Yeah, well done, staff. Thank you, Justin.
Right,
Okay,
so that was not enough to approve. We only got 4 of 9 votes. We have 5 absences.
Oh, I'm gonna have to have a double check on that, because sometimes if it's a majority of those present versus having to have a majority of the committee members present, you can adopt the minutes, but we can take that offline, and if necessary, we'll bring the August minutes back at the next meeting. If after some further review, we can adopt with the unanimous of those present, then we'll consider the minutes adopted as presented.
Okay.
We'll just make a notation of that. Thank you, Justin. We're going to move on now to agenda item number 5. And before we move on to subcommittee scope and purpose, I'm going to ask if there are any public comments with regard to this agenda item. Justin, if you could check for us, please.
I'm not seeing any requests to comment at this time. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Justin. So I had a chance to visit with Carolyn, which I wish I could do every day because she's just fantastic. But we're the next part of this exercise, and William, I'm really glad that you're here, because I mean, when you look at the scope of this subcommittee, I mean, just starting with subcommittee on housing, infrastructure, and broadband, we're talking about 3 ginormous topics with a lot of different initiatives and things that we could be focused on. So I think what we want to hone in on is finding that nexus between each of those subject areas and our roles and responsibilities as members of the EAC. So that's number 1, is let's be looking for that nexus between the two. The other thing is we need to be the voice to the full committee. And I think that this is what Chair Walker is looking at the subcommittees to do, is we are to become maybe not subject matter experts, but certainly for purposes of our committee, if there is an agenda item that deals with housing, infrastructure, broadband, Chair Walker and the other committee members are going to be looking to us, our subcommittee, to bring forward whether it's strategies or initiatives or just comments on maybe the path that we should follow. So in having an opportunity to talk with Carolyn, I know that under the category of housing, certainly what's been in the news a lot lately, I think, is centered around legislation impacting homeless populations and the use of executive orders to clear encampments, and really what is that doing to our communities in terms of, if we didn't have shelter beds for them to begin with, going and clearing encampments, how is that otherwise affecting not only our the folks who find themselves without housing, but what is that doing to our greater community? So kind of wanting to put that over on the whiteboard, but again, that might be too broad. So we're going to have this discussion, but I think that really front and center is a lot of things coming out under homelessness. With regard to, and I'm just going to talk and then I'm going to turn it over. Amber, you're going to be up next to kind of give us your thoughts. So under that housing umbrella for our subcommittee, again, homelessness. Under infrastructure, one of the things that I've always been a little fascinated about is who are we planning for, and how do our planning strategies and land use strategies really work for the greater good. So under infrastructure, as it relates to transportation, we've seen a big push for transit-oriented development, right? TOD, transit-oriented development, as using that as a land use planning strategy. So allowing for intensive land use around areas that otherwise have access to really good transportation. And again, who does that work for? It would work well for my husband and I because we're not worried about getting to neighborhood schools. We're not necessarily worried about getting too far outside of maybe where public transportation is going to get us. We also would have access to, grocery stores. If you've ever seen somebody trying to struggle on a bus system with little kids or groceries or trying to get back from IKEA on the bus, it just doesn't work. So when we talk about transit-oriented development, that as a land use strategy, who is that working for? And maybe do we need to rethink a little bit broader when it comes time to land use strategies? Maybe one size fits all is not where we need to be. Finally, with regard to broadband, there is a California initiative called Broadband for All. Broadband for All. And they actually have a digital equity plan, California digital equity plan, that I really want all of us to have some working familiarity with. And the California Department of Technology is really looking at initiatives around digital inclusion and public participation. And I think that those are a couple of things that, again, when under all of these strategies, how is it that we can make sure that the public is having a voice and an opportunity to share with us, to be our partners with us as we move these initiatives forward. So that's kind of what I was thinking. Because we have the top guy with us today, I'm wondering, William, can you weigh in right now and let us know, are we on the right track? Is there something else you'd like us to see us going? And then when you're done with your comments, William, if you could hand it off to Amber, who comes up on my screen first. Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Villegas Walker. I wrote the motions for our committees a little bit out of duress because I know how committees work, and here we are about 2 months before some of us end our term. So I really put these 3 items together not because they really had, well, the nexus that I see between them is they all deal with land use. And when you look at land use, there are folks that are the haves, like folks who own land and control land, and the have-nots who don't. And so, and that comes into play when we're trying to build high-speed rail, where much of the rail line is cleared, but we're still arguing with folks about acquiring properties and what's the impact of the state acquiring properties from folks along that corridor. Are those folks that are, from groups that are underrepresented, or maybe it's a landowner that has land that might be rented by folks who are underrepresented. So it's just understanding what the implications of land use are. I think that's the larger bucket, but a smaller bucket could just be any initiative that might align with the three items that are listed: housing, infrastructure, and broadband. And I know that from the beginning, Member Stewart has talked about the digital act that you spoke of that's dealing with how we're implementing middle mile and last mile policy around bringing broadband access to places that don't have it, to communities that need it, that depend upon it. And I guess one last connection I can make is just the work that I have been able to do and it's not because I'm chair, it's just because I had the time and my work schedule is a bit more flexible. But like, I took a part of the tour of the Bishop and Eastern Sierra area where they talked about the broadband issues there and how folks didn't have access. And Caltrans talked about the broadband that they brought to that region. And so, when a cell carrier goes down, they could be taking advantage of the infrastructure that Caltrans pioneered in that area. Maybe those broadband companies need to be informed of that. Maybe the EAC is a way to, like, if there are folks in the community that work with telecommunications providers, maybe we are that link. So understanding how we can participate in the activities that are already existing of the commission, of CalSTA, and of Caltrans, and finding those connection points. I'll be touring the Bakersfield high-speed rail corridor alignment and I believe station area this week as a part of the commission meeting. And I say these things so that you all know that you all can join in them too. And I think that the emails do come from staff, and sometimes people don't have a chance to see all of their emails, but you're all welcome to these same tours. And I think that when I go on this tour, I'm going to likely learn something about the Bakersfield area that maybe I would bring to this committee just because I'm on the ground. So I think that that's most important, is that committee members can bring their own initiatives. We're all experts in our particular area to the committee, and have a place to bring an idea that could become a resolution that would then go to the larger committee for approval, or that could be a letter, like the letter that we sent to Secretary Omashankin regarding our ad hoc CAPTI committee business. So I think that I'll stop there. I don't want to take too much time, and I'll hand it over to Member Novi.
I couldn't agree with both of you more. I think that the direction you guys are choosing to have this committee go is wonderful. I think that going back to the public and asking for their feedback, because Cheryl, you're right. I don't have the experience of going to the grocery store and then taking my kids on a stroller and trying to grab those groceries and going on the bus and then seating them. I do it at the airport because I travel a lot, but my everyday experience with my work situation is obviously very different than everyone else's, whether that's mass transportation at the airport or a bus station or a train station. And so I do think that we need to talk to the public, or at least allow the public an opportunity to speak their truth of what they deal with. And I think we have to come from an empathetic way of what people are dealing with. I know if the buses are delayed or the trains are delayed or BART is down, it is very frustrating, right? And an employer doesn't really care that BART was delayed for the day or whatever the case may be. Obviously, with my background in construction, infrastructure is always a big deal for us, whether high-speed rail or any of the roads and bridges that get you to and from where you're going. My background, that's a priority, but how do we do that in a way that we not only help the mass drivers of California, but all of those that are using alternative ways to get to and from where they're going? So I like the direction that you guys are having. I think always having public feedback is incredibly important, because we do need to be made aware of struggles that people have that we might not even think about. And so if we can continue that path, I think it's very important.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I can go. I think the point about sort of meeting at the nexus is really important. And I think what I'm particularly interested in is, through our role in the subcommittee, making sure that, one, we are centering equity, right? Which to me means that we're centering the perspective of those who are most impacted by sort of the lack of coordination that may be happening among these three transportation agencies and the world of housing or the world of infrastructure or the world of broadband, right? Like when I think of housing, which is the field that I'm sort of steeped in day to day, you know, I think about who to Chair Walker's point, who owns the land, right? So we have state agencies that own land, and are we making sure that we're sort of continuing to press to ensure that those resources are being thought about and used in an intentional and impactful way, if they could be, to sort of alleviate housing pressures in different ways, right? When I think about infrastructure, particularly TOD, I can tell you that for housing developers, they're getting pretty integrated with transit systems and understand sort of the services that are available and the limitations, but are we educating and working with transit providers to make sure that they're also aware, well, what are the benefits if the land around my planned station, you know, serves housing needs in a way that's needed. I know that sort of those strategies differ from transit agency to transit agency, and I would just be interested in making sure that, again, we're representing kind of the needs of the different communities we're in. And so I think that nexus is important, and just I don't have a good understanding of how the three state agencies are thinking about these issues. And so I think there's a little bit of like internal work that needs to be done so that we can all sort of like get on the same level with what those approaches are, if there are any. And, you know, it could be that there's not a lot of intentionality happening necessarily, and that we can sort of help focus the conversation in that way. So yeah, and to that chat point, absolutely. And so just thinking about also like, how do we sort of publicly message out what our role is and what we're focusing on? I mean, the other thing, it's three topic areas that are very broad. So I do think we need to sort of like dial down, at least initially, to see what priorities elevate to the top. So yeah, I would just like to get out of like this speaking in sort of generalities and really like, what are our top three issues under each of these sort of subheaders and where are we going? So
Perfect. Thank you. You know, when I think about transit-oriented development, I mean, it works great in certain areas and in urban cores. But if you look at what's being built, a lot of times it's not in the urban core. And in our as-built environment, what was that crazy statistic we just heard about how much of housing is actually made up of single-family housing in California? And so I think we really do need to start looking at you know, these land use strategies that are going to allow us to house the people that need housing. So thank you for that. Connie, let's go to you and then to Randy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, you know, at our next meeting, we'll have the item on broadband that I've been hoping to bring forward. You know, what I would like to see us do around broadband, there's already lots of committees working in this space. The equity plan that was spoken about had so much incredible outreach across the state. The real issue is the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of that plan. In particular, the state's goal of a 10,000 mile middle mile is really bold and audacious. My guess is that about 6,500 miles of that middle mile are going to get done. And my question is, what's the 4,000 that's missing? How did that impact the equity goal of that plan? And I know in some instances in my community I did pretty well, but there's one area I lost track of that isn't going to get there. And the feds are going to release $1.8 billion for last mile soon. And when they release that last mile, I will not be able to use that last mile to get that area of the state, which, you know, ironically is about the size of Vermont, of Rhode Island. So, you know, because of that one middle mile that isn't going to be there, all of the people in that area will miss out. So I know that happened in my region. As I said, I did pretty well. My tribes are protected. They did really well, but it made me wonder in the rest of the state what was happening. So I thought we would be good at just because it originally starts with access to Caltrans roadways. And there are legitimate reasons why roadways can't be used. And in that case, we can write a letter and advocate for some, you know, for the legislature to look at another system and not just leave those folks that are going to be left behind high and dry, but really communicate why we weren't able to use the right of way to help our equity partners. The other thing I wanted to mention also is there's an enormous amount of workforce opportunities in the broadband space. And, you know, the best thing would be for community members in those communities that have lacked broadband to be trained and be able to be on that workforce rather than shipping workforce from other areas, because then that money will stay in the community. And so, you know, we'll hopefully be hearing at our next meeting about efforts to combine that. And I think, and that's really, workforce is also the nexus between the three things. Like you know, it would be great to hear from transportation what they're doing around workforce in housing, you know, in the housing to encourage in the region, so we can make sure that in areas, especially that are helping minorities, that, you know, minorities are getting the jobs as well.
Connie, thank you. You said with regard to broadband to really have a focus on implementation, monitoring, and was there a third?
Yeah, it was evaluating.
Evaluation.
What
Thank
could
you.
we do? What could we do better?
There we go.
You know, how could we do it? And I actually think that, you know, that framework could work for how we operate in a lot of this stuff, you know.
Absolutely.
I think, you know, I think part of our goal is to capture lessons learned so we can do better by the communities that we're here to support.
Very good. Thank you so much. Randy?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Apologies for joining 11 minutes late. I came from another work meeting, and I appreciate the conversation. I like the idea of taking, you know, kind of like a nexus analysis approach to looking at where housing infrastructure and broadband come together, and then adding additional layer on top of that in regards to analyzing specifically the roles that the three state agencies can play in those and influencing those. I think that's like an approach I'd recommend. In some cases, I was having a hard time thinking about, you know, there might not always be direct link for some of the infrastructure projects to housing. I know that there often is, but sometimes, I mean, there's a role sometimes in just discussing infrastructure. I know that that's seems to be like kind of one of the main focuses of the CTC in particular, and Caltrans as well. So I don't want to stay just married to things that only touch on all three, right? How do we also have conversations around vehicle miles traveled and transit only lanes? I think that that's important as well, right? And so I want us to be able to still continue to influence decisions that relate to infrastructure, whether or not there is a housing connection or not. And another way I've been thinking about housing, because when I worked at City 8 CDC, we actually got a CARB grant to do an anti-displacement study and work with our transportation equity and affordable housing task force. So we worked at the intersection of affordable housing and transportation, and generated some ways that our community could influence both things. And we took kind of like a geographic approach because we got a grant that focused on the State Route 15 area that was impacted by a freeway. So I do wonder though, like, yeah, I guess brainstorming out loud here, like, I wonder about, and I've also been thinking about the historical perspective a bit as well. In the 60s and 70s, there was a community in San Diego that was displaced for the 252 freeway. And that's like South Crest and Southeast San Diego, which at that time was primarily home to the Black community in San Diego. And sadly, the project displaced over 1,000 residents. And so that area was awarded a Reconnecting Communities grant. And one of the things that we've spoken about there is how can we quantify the number of folks that were impacted, displaced from that, and also begin the conversation around reparations for those who were displaced from that area. So I do wonder about like how can we, the legacy of displacement from Caltrans as it relates to housing, how can we be aware of that and correct and implement corrective actions that relate. So those are some of the things that are coming to mind.
Fantastic. Do we have any committee members that have not yet weighed in? Okay, so I'm gonna go down my list of some of the things that I heard and see if we can start to formulate where we want to focus on our next meeting. Obviously, we are all deeply concerned with equity and equity outcomes. Public participation ranks very high on our list in terms of being inclusive in our outreach and our deliberation and our outcomes. I really champion the idea of asking the 3 state agencies, just tell us where you are on some of these initiatives that we've identified in terms of the land use strategies around whether it be vehicle mile traveled in that transition away from the gas tax to VMT. I think is that's a huge equity issue. I think transit oriented development, again, I think that we need to look at that as a land use strategy and how are the state agencies implementing that when they are looking at things. Randy, when you talk about the displacement and the ongoing, past displacement, but anticipated future displacement. So how do the state agencies weigh and value that displacement? What kind of factors are considered? What goes into that decision-making process? And then at the end, how do they ensure that an equitable outcome for those who are impacted by the planning? With regard to broadband, Connie, I really appreciated your comments with regard to implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Because with regard to the state's broadband plan, I have a sense that train has already left the station. So where our committee can have the larger EAC can really have some add value is in that implementation, monitoring, and evaluation component. So I thought all of that was really good. I think that understanding where the state agencies are with regard to each of our topics, housing, infrastructure, and broadband, getting on board with where they see their focus through an equity lens is going to be vital to our determining where we're going to be most effective. Other comments?
Well, I mean, I would just +1 that it's hard to know where to go or how to direct our focus without that base understanding of where
Exactly. So I kind of see that as maybe one of our next agenda items, right? Is certainly a presentation on what are the strategies, what's the implementation of from an equity perspective. of some of these initiatives that we have talked about. Kind of open that up for staff. Carolyn or Sequoia, or if anyone can maybe help us understand what would a presentation look like if we're wanting to ask, okay, well, CalGEMS, when it comes to broadband or when it comes to transit-oriented development, what is it that you can share with us so that we're strategic on where we want to occupy this space?
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. And before I hop in, William, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to respond before I answer Cheryl's question?
You can go ahead. I think what I have to say will relate to what you're about to say.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So I think a couple things in terms of VMT and the strategy, that we're implementing as we transition away from the gas tax, we could definitely arrange for a presentation given by some of the staff in the Director's Office of Sustainability, since they largely focus on VMT mitigation and our approach, at least for Caltrans, around that. So that's something that I could inquire about and we could schedule for the next subcommittee meeting. In terms of the transit-oriented development and things like that, I would need to get back to you all around who the appropriate person would be to provide information on that. But then I think with you, you also mentioned around broadband, we do have that presentation coming to the October EAC meeting. So I'm wondering if we want to have that presentation first and then determine what the follow-up looks like coming out of that. And I see, Connie, you're shaking your head yes. So we're working with CPUC and the Department of Technology to bring that presentation to the full committee on October 24th. And I think then this subcommittee could take that and determine what the next steps might be.
Okay. And Carolyn, just so we can make sure, because our time is limited at our meetings, if we can make sure that some of the things that we're going to want to know about is what was the public participation and the equity considerations that went into that broadband, and to Connie's point, how will the focus then be on implementation monitoring and evaluation? Since the plan's already there, how do we make sure that what is part of that plan actually is going to work?
Yeah, thanks for pulling those out, Cheryl. I think we have flagged those as key areas of concern for the folks that are presenting on October 24th, but I will definitely pass these questions along to them so they have that in mind as they present. But also on October 24th, we've set aside some substantial time for discussion and questions following their presentation. So if anything is not addressed in what they present, I encourage all of you to definitely raise those questions. And if there are things that they can bring back and share with you all, or share at a future subcommittee meeting, or share via email, I think we have a lot of options there. Okay,
and then Carolyn, one other thing, the legacy displacement, both the legacy displacement and then future displacement, is there someone that you could think about that could help us with a better understanding as to how those decisions are made, were made, and what maybe is being planned in terms of reparations or some other mechanism for them to be made, displaced individuals, households to be made whole?
Yeah, let me look into that a little bit more and see who the appropriate either division or program or office would be to speak to that point. Is this specific to what you all were discussing around transit-oriented development, or more broadly in terms of just our transportation infrastructure?
I think I'm hearing that as more broadly. I mean, I think it unfortunately has been something that's impacted a lot of us. I mean, several meetings ago, I think I shared with the full committee that my father was actually displaced twice in Sacramento as a result of the building of the freeways in and around old Sacramento. So certainly is something that's always piqued my interest. And Randy, I'm very much appreciate you mentioning that today. So, so Caroline, if not only legacy displacement, but now that there is such a focus on, we hope, equity outcomes, what additional layers are being investigated to make sure that the right decisions are being made in the right areas? I think I'm going to stop talking for just a minute. Connie, your hand is up, and then we'll go to Chair Walker. Connie, please.
I just want to be clear, because broadband seems like a very big topic, and we're not the broadband committee. But to be specific, SB 156 gave $2 billion to the state to be used in Caltrans right-of-ways. So that's the part that we should evaluate and monitor, has to do with the Caltrans right-of-way use and how that impacted the state's equity plan. Just so everyone knows, that equity plan is already, when you say it's launched, it is launched. It went through an entire year process. Many of us participated in that. It has been sent to the NTIA and approved by the NTIA. And that process allows the releasing of the last mile money. So the issue is really like, how did it go around the $2 billion that Caltrans got to use in the right-of-ways, and the decision-making around the impacts there and how that affects the implementation of the plan. I wanted to just say that to be clear, like we're not trying to expand our reach as a as an agency. So when we go back, Carolyn, to CDT, that's really, I mean, part of the question is to CDT is, how did it go working with Caltrans on figuring out how to have access to that right of way? What are the lessons learned there, in case there ever is more money for getting more middle mile out to those areas we know fell off the plan? What are the lessons learned there? I don't want to accidentally get into evaluating the actual plan.
Thank you, Connie. Chair Walker.
Thank you, Chair Villegas Walker. I think that when you talk about right of way as well, I'm thinking of University Avenue in East Palo Alto, or International Boulevard in Oakland, Santa Monica Boulevard in LA. These are streets that were state highways that have been now handed back over to those cities. So there are also communities that still lack the same level of access to the internet in comparison to the more affluent communities in East Palo Alto and Oakland, LA, et cetera. Does that mean we don't consider those as priority corridors because they're no longer state highway property, even though they still function like highways, and the people who live on them were still, prevented from having opportunity by being on those highways, right? So I think that that's something to think about. When we talk about transit providers, I think about the Transit Transformation Task Force. They're doing really cool things. Like, they're going and taking tours of our transit facilities and getting feedback, giving and receiving feedback about what it's like to go from provider to provider. And it would be nice to see a regular participant on that task force from this committee, and making sure whenever there are opportunities like that, if they're involving housing, infrastructure, or broadband, that someone from this committee is nested into those opportunities. And the workforce piece is really important. You're more than likely to get in participation from a community that's underserved by putting out a job fair and then looping in, like having a panel about equity during that job fair and getting that feedback and feeding folks. And like, we're going to be in Sassoon next week or in a couple weeks. We don't have the budget to feed folks, but it would be great if we're doing something that's related to equity and we're going to someone's community and we're getting feedback from them, that we create spaces that are welcoming, that you can get something from, as much as we're trying to get something from our constituents. And I don't want you all to lose sight of the most important component of this committee mission is just the stuff that comes to your mind, you know, when you applied to this committee. If you could just take back that document that said all the things that you cared about, why you applied to the EAC, bringing that to each of the subcommittees that you serve on, that's the most important. And that's how we'll be able, like, if everyone started at the beginning of the year with their 3 top ideas and we see where the alignment is, and then we winnow down from there.
Thank you, Chair Walker. Carolyn, I see this as on our agenda as an action item, but it seems to me that this is going to be kind of evolving over time. And part of this with regard to, especially within the broadband space, I think that where we go from here is going to depend in large part on the presentation to the larger committee. Is that next week or week after? But it sounds like, at least for the next subcommittee meeting, I would see that we would like to hear more about VMT, TOD, and legacy displacement, retro, and going forward. Now, are those 3 things that we can just agree on, either by a show of hands or some other way, that those would be 3 things that we would like to see on the next subcommittee meeting? Again, I kind of take this as a work in progress, but in listening to the comments, those are at least 3 things that I think we want to learn more about as we're kind of standing up this subcommittee. But if I heard that wrong, correct me out. Good? Okay. Carolyn, is that enough direction for you and staff to help us through our next subcommittee meeting?
Absolutely. And this item was listed as an action item just in case if any action needs to be taken. So that way you have that option, but this is sufficient. No specific action has to be taken, and staff can follow up with arranging some of these presentations. Considering the fact that we only have an hour generally for these subcommittee meetings, Cheryl, I'll work with you on timing and prioritization of what we bring to the next subcommittee meeting, but we've captured these in our notes for now.
Very good. That's fantastic. Okay. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and so we're going to wrap up here. If as you come away from this meeting and you have time to reflect on what the other committee members and staff have shared, and Chair Walker, if you have other areas of interest or concern, areas of interest or enthusiasm, just feel free to shoot me an email. I think you can find my email buried in there somewhere, but it's my full name, Cheryl Villegas Walker @gmail.com. I really value the collective voice that we all bring to this committee. And I just thought that the fact that each of us had different areas of interest with regard to this subcommittee, I think that that's fantastic. I think we're going to have a really great time together, learning and walking forward as a team. So anything else? Any closing comments by anyone? Chair Walker.
Just like I said, I'm not sure like what'll happen in the next couple of months, because some of us will be terming out. I think something to also consider is how we bring in membership, because I mean, if we want it to be kind of a working committee, figuring out what the parameters of that are. Can that happen? Can there be work between meetings? What does that look like? Because like we said, if there's only an hour and we meet for an hour, even on a monthly basis, it might limit us if we're following typical rules for how this committee convenes.
Very good. Again, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and thank you all very much for your participation. And staff, again, thank you for your support in getting us to this point. And I look forward to seeing all of you at our full EAC meeting. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Chair Villegas Walker.
This meeting is adjourned.